I have no doubt that prayer has made a difference. I mean, I just, we trust the Lord to do what He sees fit to do, but we also pray. And we bear one another's burdens, supposed to. And when you can put that out there, and I mean, hundreds of people respond and say, I'm praying, I'm going to pray, I'm praying. Been praying. The other day, I posted, pray for my mom, she's in surgery right now. And man, I had 10, 20 people that responded, I've been praying all day. And man, that's overwhelming. That's overwhelming just to know that you can instantly share that and people respond. It's pretty remarkable. It really is. We come tonight to chapter 19. These chapters these sermons are difficult to title. You just kind of have to pick something that's in there and give it a theme of it and just say this is what the title is. And tonight it is My Redeemer Lives, because in verse 25 he says, for I know that my Redeemer liveth. And let me say right now, I know that my Redeemer liveth. I know my Redeemer lives. I know it because the Bible says it, and I know it because of what's in my heart, what He's done in my life, and what He continues to do in my life. Chapter 19, verse 1, Job answered. He answered Bildad and said, how long will you vex my soul and break me in pieces with words? These 10 times have you reproached me. You're not ashamed that you make yourselves strange to me. And be it indeed that I have erred, mine error remaineth with myself. If indeed you will magnify yourselves against me, and plead against me my reproach. Know now that God hath overthrown me, hath compassed me with His net. Behold, I cry out of wrong, but I am not heard. I cry aloud, but there is no judgment. He hath fenced up my way that I cannot pass. He hath set darkness in my paths. He hath stripped me of my glory and taken the crown from my head. He hath destroyed me on every side, and I am gone. Mine hope hath He removed like a tree. He hath also kindled His wrath against me, and He counteth me unto Him as one of His enemies. His troops come together and raise up their way against me and encamp round about my tabernacle. He hath put my brethren far from me, and my acquaintances are verily estranged from me. My kinfolk have failed, and my familiar friends have forgotten me. They that dwell in mine house and my maids count me for a stranger. I am an alien in their sight. I called my servant, and he gave me no answer. I entreated him with my mouth. My breath is strange to my wife, though I entreated her for the children's sake of mine own body. Yea, young children despise me. I arose, and they spake against me. All my inward friends abhorred me, and they whom I loved are turned against me. My bone cleaveth to my skin and to my flesh, and I am escaped with the skin of my teeth. If you ever wonder where that statement, that phrase comes from, I escaped by the skin of my teeth, right here in the book of Job. It's amazing how many everyday phrases and statements we use that people who don't believe the Bible use, and it's biblical. It comes from the Bible. Have pity upon me. Have pity upon me, O ye my friends, for the hand of God hath touched me. Why do you persecute me as God and are not satisfied with my flesh? Oh, that my words were now written. Oh, that they were printed in a book, that they were graven with an iron pen and lead in the rock forever. For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that He shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold, and not another, though my reins be consumed within me. But ye should say, why persecute we him, seeing the root of the matter is found in me? But be ye afraid of the sword, for wrath bringeth the punishments of the sword, that ye may know there is a judgment. Number one, Job's accusations. Job's accusations. He starts this chapter, what we have as a chapter, his reply to Bildad, with some accusations. He first of all letter A, has accusations justly against his friends. They are justified accusations against his friends. He says in verse 2, how long will you vex my soul and break me in pieces with words? Many of us used to say the phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And I'm not sure if there are more untrue words spoken than those words, because the fact of the matter is, words hurt. We may want to say, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But words hurt. Words hurt. Words hurt sometimes worse than sticks and stones. To have someone that you consider a friend or a family member to say something negative about you is a very, very difficult thing to deal with. I've dealt with accusations. I've dealt with false accusations. And sometimes they are from people that I don't care. I really don't care. But sometimes they're from people that matter. And those are very difficult things to deal with. And he says, first of all, the first accusation he makes is destructive speech. That their words, their speech is against him. For what we have as chapters, they have come against him and they have beat him with their words. And here he is. We've talked about this and we'll continue to talk about it. But here he's gone through all this physical and emotional and spiritual battling that he's fought. And his friends come along and they just beat him up some more with their words. He would have felt better if they would have beat him with their hands than if they'd have beat him with their words. He would have. He'd have felt better. Second of all, he says there's persistent hostility. And now he uses a phrase that's not completely accurate. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but we do the same thing. We say, man, I called him 100 times. And we call it 5 or 6 times, and we say, I called him 100 times, That's what he says. There hasn't been 10 conversations. They haven't used 10 opportunities, but he just rounds up. He says, man, these 10 times have you reproached me. He said, you're persistent in your hostility towards me. Over and over and over and over and over. And for him, it may not have been 10 times, but it felt like 100. We've all been there. We've all had something happening. It only happens a few times, but it feels like it's happened 10, 20, 30, 40 times. He says, you're persistent. You're just over and over in your hostility towards me. Number 3, I've got astounding insensitivity. Ye are not ashamed that you make yourselves strange to me. He says, you're not even ashamed of it. You're just insensitive towards this. You don't even care. Unabashed insensitivity. Number 4, unfounded cruelty. Verse 4, and if it be indeed that I have erred, mine error remaineth with myself. He says, look, if I've erred, it's my fault, but you just beat me and beat me and beat me as though you know what's going on in my heart. And it's just unfounded. He has tried to communicate. We've read it. He's tried to communicate over and over. I'm not this. I'm not the wicked person that you keep accusing me of. God is doing this, and we'll get to his accusations against God here in a minute. But he says, God is doing this, and God is doing that, and I don't deserve this. And whenever you look at it from that perspective, the perspective of the wicked deserving punishment, he's absolutely right. God even said of him, he's a perfect and upright man. God allowed what was happening, but from his perspective, he was absolutely right. He was saying, look, I'm not wicked. I'm not wallowing in my own iniquity. I live right. I live true and pure. But there was it's an unfounded cruelty. Number 5, an obvious arrogance. Verse 5, he says, if indeed ye will magnify yourselves against me. He says, what you're doing is you're saying, you are less than, you're wicked, and we're righteous. You're dealing with this because there's sin in your life, and you need to get right with God. And they magnify themselves, and it is obvious arrogance. That they just say, well, we're better than you. And let us give you the wisdom that you need because our lives are right and you're doing something wicked, so let me preach to you. And it wasn't preaching out of love. It wasn't preaching out of a calling. It was preaching because you're wicked and we're better than you. And then number 6, brash falsehoods. If indeed you magnify yourself against me and plead against me my reproach. Again, he's saying, you're pleading against my reproach, but it's not there. There's not a reproach. Is he saying I'm perfect? No, he's not saying that. He's saying the things that you're accusing me of, that you're condemning me for, just aren't there. And you're doing this, what you're doing is you're bearing false witness against me. I mean, that's the exact words. Of course, the 10 Commandments had not been given at this time. But if you look at the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're bearing false witness against him. So that's the accusations against his friends. Letter B, though, we have unjustly. The accusations unjustly against God. Now, I want to be careful here because I don't want to put too much on to Job, but we do see, and I think it picks up in chapter 38, God deals with Job and he addresses Job. And although he did not sin in his responses to God, God still deals with him in chapters 38 and 39 and 40 and deals with the way that he responded to God in his accusations. First of all, his accusation was that God was judging him. Know now that God hath overthrown me and hath compassed me with his net. That is a reference back to what Bildad had said in the previous chapter. Verse 7 of chapter 18. Says the steps of his strength, speaking of Job, it's kind of a third person. He's kind of alluding to the wicked man, but he's obviously addressing Job. The steps of his strength shall be straightened, and his own counsel shall cast him down. For he is cast into a net by his own feet. And Job responds. He remembers that. He says, look, I'm not fallen into a net by my own feet. He says that God hath overthrown me and hath compassed me with his net. He says God is judging me. Now, again, I don't want to judge Job. That's not what I'm trying to do. But he is making a false accusation against God because God's not judging him. God's not encompassing him with his net and trying to snare him. Second of all, he says God is ignoring me. Number 2, that God was ignoring him. Verse 7, you can feel the desperation in Job in this verse. At least I can. I think we can identify with this verse. This is how we feel sometimes. Now, it's an unjust accusation. And when we feel this way about God, it's not an accurate feeling about God, but we're human. We're flesh. We're fragile. We fail and we are not right. Behold, I cry out of wrong. In other words, I cry out of the wrong that's happened to me. He's not saying I'm wrongly crying to God. He's saying I'm crying out of a place of being wronged. I cry out of wrong, but I am not heard. I cry aloud, but there's no judgment. There's nothing, there's no response. I cry out of my pit that I'm in. I cry aloud, yet my prayers seem like they're just hitting the ceiling. And we've all probably been there and felt that way before. Job, although it's an unjust accusation against God, we relate to that. But take heart that in those times when you feel, and feelings are a very dangerous thing, but when you feel like God is ignoring and God isn't listening, understand God knew exactly what was happening in Job's life. God allowed it to happen. Was it fun? Was it joyous? No. But God knew what Job could handle. And he said, you go talk to Job. You go put your hands on Job now. You can touch him. And I know what he's going to do. And if God allows testing in my life, what must he think of me? He must think I can endure it. And if God thinks that I can endure this awful situation, then I can through him. Because I can do all things through him who gives me strength. But there was an unjust accusation that God was ignoring. Number 3, that he had removed his hope, that God had removed his hope. Now, when I say hope, I don't mean his hope in God. We talked about this the other week. That when we speak of this hope, the hope that things are going to get better. Because we see his hope by the end of the chapter. We saw it in the previous chapters. And we see it by the end of the chapter where his eternal hope is, where his spiritual hope is. But he says, man, I have no hope on this earth. Verse 10. He hath destroyed me on every side, and I am gone. And mine hope he hath removed like a tree. It's been cut down. That's what he's talking about. My hope has been chopped down. He's just cut the hope down, and there's nothing left but a stump of hope. And sometimes we feel that way too, that God has just kind of pulled the rug out from under us, and there's no recovery and anything like that. What a great thing we'll see by the end of the book. Number 4, that God was angry with him. He hath also, verse 11, kindled his wrath against me, counteth me unto him as one of his enemies. His troops come together, raise up their war against me. He has this idea that God is just angry with him. And I'm sure whenever he said that, the devil might have thought, got him now. I got him. Because he thinks God's angry at him. God's giving me rain to do this. But he's blaming God for it, and he thinks God is angry at him. And how often do we hear Christians say, well, God's just angry with me. God's angry at me. That's not the nature of God, to be honest with you. Now we see the wrath of God, and he even talks about it by the end of this chapter. We hear of the wrath of God. But God doesn't deal in anger with us. He doesn't deal in anger with us as individuals. Jesus Christ died for us. God's wrath was taken out on Jesus Christ. The devil wants us to believe, though, that God gets angry with us and that he deals with us in anger. You know, there are times that I deal with my kids and I am not happy about them. And there are times that I may be angry with my kids. But we're not perfect parents. And sometimes maybe as parents, we deal in anger with our kids. But God is not us. God is the perfect parent. And when God deals with us, he deals with us in love. Everything, we talked about this when we looked at the life of Christ, the miracles of Christ. Everything Christ did was about love. Even whenever he went into the temple, and people misconstrue this and they make something of it they ought not make of it. But when Jesus went in the temple and overturned the tables of the money changers, he wasn't just angry. There was a matter of love in there as well. So he thought he was angry with him. Number 5, that God had turned people against him. Now, we don't know. We can only take Job's word for it of what had happened in his life in relation to these that we'll look at. In verse 13 down through verse 19, he talks about the different people that had turned against him. The only record we have is what Job says. But we know that God didn't do that. We know that God didn't turn people against him. You know, sometimes I may think that God has done that in our lives. God has turned our parents, our kids, or friends, or the preacher, or whoever against us. But it's not true. He says in verse 13, He hath put my brethren far from me, and mine acquaintance are verily estranged from me. My kinsfolk have failed, and familiar friends have forgotten me. They that dwell in my house, my maids, count me for a stranger. I'm an alien in their sight. I called my servant. He gave me no answer. He says his servants have turned against him. I don't know that that's true. I don't know if he's, as we kind of do, and like he did in verse 3, these 10 times, we exaggerate some of those things. I don't know if this is accurate or an exaggeration. It's very probable that it's an exaggeration. I doubt very seriously that if he called his servants, that they truly would not respond to him. That's a quick way to lose your job, and they depended on him. But I'm sure there were times that he called and they didn't respond in the way he thought. He says, they've just abandoned me. They've walked away. They don't love me, and they don't do this. And second of all, his wife. My breath is strange to my wife. And that's maybe very likely. She said, curse God and die. Just get it over with. And it may have been that his wife said, look, I don't know what's going on in your life, but obviously something you've done, there's a curse on you, maybe. There's a curse on you or whatever, and you need to stay away from me. We need a distance, because whatever's happening to you, I don't want to happen to me. I've already lost my kids and everything we own. I don't want to end up with leprosy or boils or whatever he had. So you just stay away from me. He says, my wife doesn't even know me. She's turned against me. Children. Though I entreated for the children's sake of my own body. Verse 18. Yea, young children despised me. I arose and they spake against me. Now, I don't think this is a spiritual matter. Children are truthful to a fault sometimes. If you see kids and you have an abnormality, you know what they're going to say? What's wrong with him? Mommy, why does he look like that? And if Job has boils all over his body and he walks by the kids, they're going to go, ooh, what's wrong with him, Mama? What's he got? Ooh, I'll stay away from him. Well, that's the condition he's in. He also says his friends, letter D. All my inward friends abhorred me, and they whom I love are turned against me. His friends and his loved ones have turned against him. Well, if his friends all responded like these guys, yeah, you would say my friends have turned against me. But it wasn't God that turned them against him. It's, in some ways, the sinful nature that we have that causes us to keep distance, to rebel, or whatever it is. But it wasn't God that did that. Number 2, Job's appeal. Verse 21 is one of those verses that stands out to me. There's 3 verses in this passage that just really stand out to me, and this is the second one that stands out to me. Verse 7 that we talked about earlier, behold, I cry out of wrong, not heard, I cry aloud, there is no judgment. And here we come to verse 21, and he says to his friends, here they have, I don't think you have to imagine very much with me. You've walked this book with me, but imagine Job in the condition that he's in, dealing with the friends that he has. And his appeal, first of all, is for pity. Verse 21, have pity on me. Have pity on me. And it's not just, hey, can you have a little compassion, a little bit of pity for me? It is 2 times that he says it. Y'all know me, you know my imagination. And I try to imagine the physical place that Job was in when he says this. He's beat down. Is he sitting there? Is he standing? I don't imagine him standing. I imagine this taking place with him seated, and then in my mind I imagine him, if he is seated, almost falling back and saying, have pity on me. Just have pity upon me. Here you've come and just beat me up, and I see him just at the low saying, you're supposed to be my friends. Have pity on me. Have pity upon me. Oh, ye my friends. And now, I don't know what their internal response was. But I like to think that my thought process would have been one of, what have I done? Oh man, he's right. I need to have pity on him. It doesn't appear that even made a dent in their lives. But he says, have pity. And if you go back, that's letter A. He has an appeal for pity. And then he has an appeal for remembrance. If you go back to chapter 18, verse 17, Bildad just drives the stake right into him. In verse 17, his remembrance shall perish from the earth, and he shall have no name in the street. Job says, have pity on me. Verse 22, why do you persecute me? Verse 23, though, he says, remember. I want remembrance. Oh, that my words were now written. Oh, that they were printed in a book, that they were graven with an iron pen and lead in the rock forever. He says, I want to be remembered. Oh, that these things that I'm dealing with, oh, that they would be remembered. Little did he know that thousands of years later, they would be remembered, that they would, as he said, this kind of struck me, Brother Dave, in reading it. I never thought about it before. Oh, that they were printed in a book. How did they print things in a book back then? It got my curiosity up that Job would say, oh, that they were printed in a book. Now, I don't know if he meant scrolls or what, but that has a very modern idea, a very modern message to us. We understand being printed in a book. Isn't God good? Isn't it great that God just gives us these little nuggets in the midst of everything? And here we have, he didn't even realize how prophetic he was. He said, oh, if they were printed in a book, and here we have them, thousands of years later, printed in a book. Number 3, Job's admittance, what he admits. First of all, concerning his Redeemer. Verse 25, he says, "For I know that my Redeemer liveth. He shall stand at the latter day upon the earth." First of all, concerning his Redeemer, he knows who his Redeemer is. He knows who his Redeemer is. If you were to study this passage and look at this verse, the word Redeemer is the same word that we looked at in the book of Ruth. Whenever Naomi talked about the Redeemer, and then Boaz talked about the nearer kinsman. That's the idea here, is that there was someone that was a nearer kinsman. Now remember, in Ruth, it wasn't the same idea that we have as Jesus Christ, our Redeemer, who has purchased us back, owned us, He created us and purchased us back. But the Redeemer in Ruth rescued. He rescued the one that had been estranged. And that's the same word. He says, my rescuer. He knew who his Redeemer is. He knew where his Redeemer is. I know, and I identify, I know who my Redeemer is. I know where my Redeemer is. He says, my Redeemer liveth. And then he gives a phrase that I don't know how Job had this understanding, but he had a great understanding. He says, and that he shall stand at the latter, or the word is last, at the last day upon the earth. And what he's saying is, my Redeemer liveth. And when everything else is gone, when heaven and earth pass away, my Redeemer is going to stand. And that's our Redeemer. He is our Redeemer. He liveth. And in the last day, when everything else is gone, when the old heaven and the old earth has passed away, He's going to stand. He will be standing in the last day. Some things he admitted concerning himself, that he understood of himself. Verse 26, and though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God. What he's saying is that he was going to be resurrected. Now, I don't know how Job understood that, but he understood that there will be a resurrection. I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold not another, though my reins be consumed within me. He understood that he's going to see his Redeemer. Now this is us, y'all. We can understand this. This is who we are in the last day. Our Redeemer is going to stand. And when we're gone, whenever the worms, and doesn't really apply to us anymore because of the way they preserve bodies, but whenever our bodies are decaying in the ground, we're going to stand before Him. Our bodies will be resurrected, or spiritually at least, will be resurrected. And we'll stand before the Lord and we'll see Him with our own eyes. Number 4, Job's admonishment. He says to them, but ye should say, verse 28, why persecute we him, seeing the root of the matter is found in him? It's a hard verse to understand. What they're saying, what he is saying, that their thought process is this: what can we find to persecute him about? He's saying that's what you're saying to me. That's what you're looking for. You're just looking for reasons. You're looking for ways to persecute me. It's like you sat around going, okay, what can we find in Job to really give him a hard time to persecute him? And he admonishes them to be aware of their persecutions. Now, they thought they were being spiritual. They thought they were being righteous. We're going to point out your faults and we're going to tell you you're wicked. He says, you're just persecuting me. And then he says, second of all, to be afraid of the punishments. Verse 29, be ye afraid of the sword, for wrath bringeth the punishments of the sword, that ye may know there is a judgment. He says God's judgments are swift, and God's judgments are sure. And he's right. He says, you better be careful of how you're treating me. And Jesus reinforces this. He says, be sure you don't try to pluck out the splinter out of your brother's eye when you got a big old mote, a big old log in your own eye. Because the judgment's going to fall on you. Judge not, that you be not judged. He says, you better be careful, you better be afraid of the punishment, because the sword cometh, and the sword cometh quickly. One of my favorite chapters we've had so far. Just the realization in Job, his cry that I think the thing I love the most about it is I identify with this chapter. I identify with friends who have abandoned you, who have spoken ill against you. I identify with the thought that God's not listening, and I feel like God is doing this and doing that, although it's not accurate. I identify with that. And I identify with my Redeemer liveth. I know that my Redeemer liveth. And Lord, I thank you that you live. Man, and it's because you live that we can face tomorrow. It's because you live that we can give these prayer requests that we've given tonight, and we can, with expectation, give them that you'll answer. Now, we know that your answer doesn't always line up with our answer, and quite honestly, Lord, we ought to be thankful for that because you know better than us. And Father, I pray that we will go away from here tonight and be right in our thoughts and in our actions. Be good friends, and Lord, if the testing comes, may we respond to it the way we ought to. In Jesus' name, amen.